providing energy and jobs for a growing New York.
This week on Inside Albany, ethics bill vetoed. Governor says it's too weak. Cuomo discloses his income. His silver tongue pays big bucks. Assembly leader quits and defends the system. We'll also be joined today by two newspaper reporters who will comment on corruption charges in Albany. Dave has the first story.
The story of the ethics bill veto began on Tuesday when Governor Cuomo met reporters and issued a warning to the legislature.
Penalties is a problem. The way they define appearances is a problem. Disclosure is a problem.
Governor Cuomo, in criticizing the ethics bill the legislature recently passed with virtually no debate, added his voice Tuesday to the chorus that had been calling for its rejection. The bill calls for greater financial disclosure, a prohibition against most appearances by legislators representing clients before state agencies, and for the establishment of two ethics commissions, one for the legislature, the other for the executive branch. The reaction to the bill came first from the New York State Bar Association. They said it was labeled ethics, was 70 pages long, but it was filled with regressive provisions. Then came the editorial opinion. Newspapers called it a sham, a fraud, and a brass-plated phony. The ethics bill also was blasted last week by the recently departed Moreland Commission chairman, Joseph Califano.
But it seems to me that a bill which says when you file a financial disclosure statement, there's no criminal penalty if you lie. Just contrast that with what happens if you're a citizen of New York State and you file a false financial statement in your tax return. It's a crime.
The one criticism that I heard was that we have eliminated the criminal penalties for a false filing, but we substituted for that substantial civil penalties up to $5,000, plus the opportunity for disciplinary action to be taken by the appointing authority, whether that be the legislature or the governor's agency. And I might point out that the Sovereign Commission, which was the corruption commission appointed by the governor and the mayor, recommended the substitution of substantial civil penalties for criminal penalties because those criminal penalties have never been enforced in the decades in which the current criminal penalties are in the law. And criminal penalties have not been removed for conflict of interest, only for violation of the disclosure requirements. So that I just think that the statements are inflammatory and completely without foundation.
When you pass legislation that says you don't have to disclose any assets in the hands of your wife or minor children, it seems to me that that's a loophole. I mean, the bill is like saying that that bill is going to deal with the ethical problems in the legislature in Albany would be like saying you could dike up the water in Holland with Swiss cheese.
Governor Cuomo apparently listened to the critics, studied the bill, and then announced his decision Tuesday.
I'll wait until the end of business tomorrow in deference to the holidays. If they don't recall it by the end of business tomorrow, I will veto it.
Cuomo said he had tried to enter negotiations with the legislative leaders over the bill, but that he had been rebuffed. He said negotiations were still possible if they recalled the legislation. But once again, in statements released Wednesday within minutes of each other, the legislative leaders rejected the governor. Senator Anderson said, Cuomo's threat of a veto when we have more than a year to revise the bill could only be an act of deliberate hostility toward the legislature. Speaker Miller echoed Anderson. Unfortunately, in vetoing the bill, the governor jeopardizes the chance of any two-house bill getting to his desk this session. So an override of Cuomo's veto is a distinct probability.
They override, they override. I think it would be better, however, if they took this bill now and tried to make it a better bill.
Don't you think the public has the right to know why the governor is being paid $25,000 by groups and who is paying him that $25,000?
Absolutely. And at an appropriate time, they'll know.
Governor Cuomo has revealed at last who paid him nearly $26,000 to give speeches and write articles in 1985. Such fees, known as honoraria, are controversial. In Washington, Common Cause, which has criticized congressional honoraria, claims the lecture fees potentially can buy influence because they go directly into a politician's personal bank account. Andrew O'Rourke, who ran against Cuomo in November, tried unsuccessfully to get Cuomo to release his honoraria list. The Republican said such payments might be a conflict of interest. In September, the governor was asked about the honoraria.
As to any disclosure that involves me personally, I can't think of a disclosure that would be a problem for me. The honoraria, I hope somebody will push me. The reason I didn't give the honoraria is I gave so much of the money to charity. I didn't want to be in a position of listing Catholic charities, Jewish League, because then people would say, oh, look at this show-off. But if you keep pushing me, I'll give you the list.
When are you going to release that?
Well, it's academic where you're concerned. You've written your article.
No, it isn't. Governor,
Yeah.
Governor.
Yeah, well, as I said the first time I mentioned it, this is, I am eager to disclose everything that affects me personally. What I said was I would hold it until he came forward with the records because it would help me to induce him to come forward. As soon as I get his records, you'll hear all you want.
Even after O'Rourke released his income taxes, Cuomo refused to disclose his speaking fees. At a New York Times debate, Cuomo explained.
I've set the example, and it didn't work, unfortunately, but I'm going to persist, and I'll try to continue if I'm given the chance.
Disclose the honoraria unless Mr. O'Rourke does something else.
Well, that hope grows ever less realistic as we approach Election Day. Following Election Day, it is no longer useful as leverage, and then I'd be pleased to set a precedent, if I'm governor again, by disclosing the honoraria and everything else and putting them on file for your review.
But after the election, Cuomo was saying, mañana, mañana. When are you going to release to the public the names of the
With my next tax return, I'll release this year's honoraria, next year's honoraria, all of them.
No way, we have to wait until April.
No, you don't have to wait. You can just forget about it.
Governor, it's April 14th. You filed your income taxes yet?
Today, I think.
Would he release his list of honoraria?
Yeah, I think what I'll do is wait and see what we do with the ethics bill. I'm not sure I'd want to make a disclosure that says to the legislature, this is the kind of disclosure you ought to be making, and confuse them. So I'll wait and see what they do with the ethics bill.
Could you tell us what
your whole package?
No, I'll wait until see, well, they're providing disclosure in the law. I wouldn't want to give you a different kind of disclosure and then have people say, see, he's showboating.
Minutes later, Cuomo, perhaps realizing the potential explosiveness of his remarks, reversed himself. He would release the list. On Thursday, reporters were allowed to view the governor's income tax forms. No photocopies or cameras were allowed. For 1986, Mario and Matilda Cuomo earned nearly $174,000 in income, including $50,000 in royalties for books. In addition, the governor was paid $22,000 in honoraria and gave $12,000 to charity. The previous year, Cuomo received nearly $26,000 in honoraria and gave $14,000 to charity. The largest fees were paid by Manhattan Synagogue and the National Association of Broadcasters, which invited Cuomo to its Las Vegas convention. Each group paid Cuomo $10,000 to speak. Several New York colleges and organizations also paid Cuomo to speak, including Columbia University, which gave him $3,500, Marymount Manhattan College, the United Nations Association, and the Chautauqua Institute. Do you think there's a potential conflict of interest for politicians?
Oh, no, not if you write a speech in your lap. Don't use a state policeman. Don't get it typed and do it on your day off. How could there be a conflict?
So what is your difficulty?
They do no business with the state. This happened to be the broadcasters, your bosses.
It's a difficult decision for me to make because I really enjoy what I'm doing here, and I've always said it's the most exciting job in the Capitol. It may not be the most powerful job, but it is by far the most exciting.
Daniel Walsh has been the majority leader of the Assembly Democrats for the last 8 years. He's often the man who's had to put together the diverse majority 76 votes to pass a bill and then manage the sometimes raucous floor debate. He's described himself as part father confessor, part enforcer for the members. This week, he announced he was resigning to lead the research branch of the Business Council, a powerful lobbying organization. He will be active in redefining the council's image, he said. We talk less, though, about his future than about the present ethical troubles of the legislature. He began by referring to the news conference he held in Cattaraugus County on Tuesday.
I must tell you, of the 25 or 30 immediate people that were in the room, that question never even came up. It's like two different worlds in New York State right now. One world is Albany, and one world, in the same world, is New York City. The rest of the state is in a totally different world. This place has been mesmerized to the point of almost ridicule by the very nature of what's going on. I happen to have been one of the members who was around when Stanley Steingart and God rest his soul, Al Blumenthal, had been indicted during the nursing home scandals. I must tell you that the tension was as equally thick, so to speak, in those days as it is now. The indictments were thrown out. I think the careers of two men were fatally damaged, but not immediately. But the process and the institution survived, and it got stronger.
But isn't the situation different today? Currently, about a half a dozen district attorneys are investigating, and the leader of the Senate Democrats has admitted to paying public money to an ex-assemblyman, Clifford Wilson, to manage a political campaign. Walt says he has nobody on his staff doing exclusively political work, and he doesn't know anyone in the assembly who does. He admits there's a gray area, though.
Does the public really get incensed over the fact that one of your staff members happens to go to a rally at midday called by the Farm Bureau in your county that you're in because they have a candidate forum at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they want somebody to talk about issues, and they want, if it's not the candidate, they want the staff person to interrelate with the opponent? Now, is that political? Certainly it's political, but the public wants it that way because they schedule a 2 p.m. afternoon to have that forum. It goes on all over the state of New York. Now, is it right to have somebody solely on the public payroll doing solely political stuff? Absolutely not. And we don't do that. The distinction gets lost in trying to define A through Z, in saying that 80% is allowable, 20% is not, in defining it left and right.
But what about the office in the Assembly called House Operations that provides certain services to members, newsletters, polling, and issue papers? A former Republican Assembly candidate wrote an article in the Albany Knickerbocker News this week describing how he had stumbled on minority House operations during a visit to Albany.
He said to the guy that was leading him around, "What's this all about?" He said, "Oh, we do all this for the members." He said, "You mean at taxpayer expense?" And the guy said, "Yeah. And the Democrats have a bigger operation." And he was incredulous. And this is a candidate. Now,
Did he win?
no, he didn't.
Well, that's probably why he didn't win. He didn't know what was going on.
Well, is House operations, for instance, simply a campaign front? Are we doing public funding of campaigns, although the public may not know it?
The answer is absolutely no. Absolutely no. You know, the question comes up, I think, every year. Do you have issue people that work on campaigns? Certainly you do. Do you have people that do some in-house polling? Certainly they do. Is it a combination of functions, both government and political? Yeah, the mix. I don't know what the mix is. It depends on their own time and their own efforts. We run a church, or have run a church for the last couple of years down on Madison Avenue. That certainly isn't within the confines of the Legislative Office building. You go in there, you freeze. You got a 24-hour operation where people come on their lunch hour, they come at night, they bring their own brown bag, they stay in that church, empty church, for 8, 9, 10 hours, sorting mail, putting stamps on, zip codes and all the rest of it. That's their own private time. They wanted to do it. They feel it's the right way to do the process. Is that wrong? Certainly it's not wrong.
They're on the payroll, but they're...
Well, lunch hour, after hour, you go in there at 10 o'clock at night, you'll find 200 people during a campaign doing it.
just doing it out of the goodness
Yeah,
of
and
their heart.
I think, quite frankly, it might not be a bad idea for Inside Albany during the next campaign is to go walk into St. Joseph's Church at 10 o'clock at night and see what a good campaign effort is. And I'll tell you, a good campaign effort keeps you in the majority.
Walsh also said he was concerned that another area of inquiry, financial disclosure, might drive potentially good candidates away from helping Democrats maintain a majority.
How far does the witch hunt go before the press forgets about journalism 101 and thinks about sensationalism 202? I don't know any course in the country that's ever taught journalism in sensationalism. They taught the things that you had to do to get where you were to make an analysis of it.
Yeah, and you're not telling me, are you telling me at this point that what's happening here is total sensationalism?
No, you're overreacting maybe because I'm getting a little defensive. And I think somewhere in the middle is the correct analogy. And my point is this, on disclosure, I must tell you that the three individuals that we talked to as potential candidates mentioned two things. They couldn't afford to come to Albany. The salary is too low. And what they read in the newspaper most recently, the scandalous part of it, they know is identified to one or two individuals. It's only that the paintbrush has gone across the whole institution.
Lisa and I have been joined by two Capitol Hill reporters, Fred Dicker, who's the Capitol Bureau Chief for the New York Post, and Jeff Stinson, who's the Capitol Bureau Chief for Gannett newspapers. Let's start with what we heard from Dan Walsh, who said a couple of things. He said life and the process will go on in Albany, even though prosecutors are turning over every rock. He said that Albany and New York City seem to be mesmerized by this scandal, the implication being that the rest of the world doesn't care. And finally, the final thing that he said is the institution, I guess he means the legislature, is being tarred by reporters with a broad brush. And I expect you guys to defend yourself. What's your reaction?
My reaction, David, is that I wouldn't expect him to say anything else. I mean, Dan Walsh is part of the system. The reason he's moving on to a high-priced job with a business group is because he's an influential member of the system. If he knew that things were improper going on, would he really tell us now? I don't think so, because I think if he did, his effectiveness for the Business Council would be ruined. I'm not surprised they're angry. I think what's been exposed here is a level of corruption that shocked even old-timers like myself around here. And for members of the legislature that have been part of this corrupt practices now to say nothing was wrong is not surprising. What would be surprising is if they had the courage to step forward and say, yes, we've been doing things that were improper and we're going to change. Dan Walsh seems to say they're not going to change. I think he's wrong. I think we're going to see profound changes here very soon.
Yeah?
I don't know whether we're going to see changes or not, Fred. This is a group that pretty well circles the wagons, and they can adopt a pretty arrogant attitude toward things. And I think it's like Dan says, how much does the rest of the state of New York care whether these guys are ripping off the taxpayers? I'm not certain whether things are going to change. He's not the only legislator right now who is going through kinds of anguish because they feel their institution and they themselves personally are being smeared with a broad brush, because most of these guys are not sleazeballs and most of them are not crooks. But by the same token, they've done some things in the last couple of weeks that makes you wonder about whether they don't mind being painted with this broad brush. The first thing that comes to mind is back on April 9 when they adopted the resolution that basically says there were no guidelines governing the use of state employees. And so it's okay, in essence, if they want to work on campaigns on the taxpayers' time. And it goes on to say it's okay in the future to work on political campaigns if they don't neglect their official duties. Now, when you do something like that, you're leaving yourself wide open to being painted with a broad brush and saying these people aren't responsive, they don't care.
And they did it with virtually no debate. They did it with one negative vote on the joint resolution and what? One negative vote on the ethics bill.
That's right. Well, actually, I think there were two voice votes against it. Nancy Lorraine Hoffman in the Senate, she voted against it, and she also spoke against it on the floor. In the Assembly, George Pataki, a Republican from Peekskill, also voted against it, but he did not speak against it on the floor.
There's a certain level of arrogance, though, to suggest the public really doesn't care about this that I find even shocking at this point. New York City and the New York City area probably has about 70% of the population of the state, more or less. The New York Times, one of the most respected papers in the world, has been almost on a regular basis attacking the legislature, saying, is there no limit to their shame? My paper, The Post, and the New York Daily News and Newsday have all joined in saying that improper practices have gone on here. Rudolph Giuliani, probably the most significant Republican in this state, a hero in the New York City area, has been taking on the most powerful Republican in this state, Senate Majority Leader Warren Anderson, and saying, change your ways. I think that heralds a new day dawning here. And I think as we see indictments coming down, which I'm certain we will see, we're going to see this place rocked to its roots and practices altered.
Fred, you were one of the people who broke the big stories on use of legislative employees in campaigns. You want to explain?
Yeah, I think the Post broke the story that really rocked the place, which is the most important story in years, because it was a story which had an individual by name admitting that all he was paid $1,650 a week for was to work in a campaign for a private citizen, a former assemblyman named Clifford Wilson. This story, I think, was significant because we've been trying for years, Jeffrey, other reporters, you all, to prove what we all knew was going on, but not until we had someone who would admit doing this were we able to do it. Subsequent to that, though, there have been revelations that other people were paid as much as $1,900 a week while going, and you know about this case, Lisa, I know it's one of your favorites, going to law school full-time in Washington, D.C., an employee of the Senate minority, Fred Orenstein, was on the payroll for $1,900 a week working on a campaign. There appear to be 7 or 8 of these characters now, and I'm sure more will be emerging.
Well, Orenstein says everybody does it, so it's okay.
I think he's preparing to defend himself against a likely criminal indictment, and that he's trying to establish that his state of mind was pure when he did this. We've been told repeatedly, even by Senate Majority Leader Warren Anderson, that everybody doesn't do this. Anderson claimed, in fact, that this is against his policy for his Senate Republicans. So I think we see Orenstein desperate now, trying to save his personal career, trying to save his law practice, trying to save himself by
Fred,
saying everyone does it.
Isn't that what the joint resolution was all about? As Jeff said, they locked arms, they've circled the wagons. I said they've gone into the bunker. The joint resolution basically said that there are no rules. And doesn't that go along with, you know, looking back at that, what Fred admitted?
Yeah.
If there were no rules, then we can't be prosecuted.
Yeah, they're trying to exonerate Freddie. Matter of fact, I talked to 2 Senate Republicans who came out from conference after discussing that and after having voted on that. They started having second thoughts about, guys, did we let Fred Orenstein off the hook on this? And
Well, one DA said to me, though, Jeffrey, there may not have been any rules, but there were laws. And we know that the Albany County District Attorney, Saul Greenberg, has said flatly that the use of public monies to pay campaign workers is illegal. That's his statement. We'll see what he does about that.
What about the gray area? What about the gray area? You're talking about no-shows now. You're talking about somebody running a campaign you heard Dan Walsh.
Sure.
The church that he talked about. People working on 10 o'clock at night in that cold church and working on their lunch hour.
There's a big difference here. Indeed, there are gray areas where legislative aides during the course of their official duties will be talking to political people and doing what appears to be political things. But we're talking about people who went in, organized a campaign, produced political mailings, made sure they went out. They took volunteers and ran phone banks. They worked districts. I mean, that is not what you routinely do as a legislative employee. There are more than 4,000 legislative employees around here, and that's not what they spend their time doing.
And we're talking about a ruse, too, because they did it under phony titles. I mean, what's being fought over here is a secret operation that the public hasn't known about, and they're trying to keep it secret. If this was not wrong, why weren't they upfront about it? Why did they give someone the title of counsel when, in fact, that person was actually a campaign manager? Why did they call them local government coordinators when that person actually was someone who was running phone banks? They didn't do it, in my judgment, because they felt the public wouldn't stand for it. And what's happening now is the public is saying, we won't stand for it, and they're trying to defend the system.
The public or the editorial board?
Well, I think the public is correctly being represented in this case by the editorial boards, by the likes of Rudolph Giuliani, Robert Morgenthau, Saul Greenberg. Many people have spoken out on this, including members of this legislative chamber who have said, we don't do this and we don't think it should be done.
Why do you think, Walsh makes the point that so many members feel that they're tainted by the broad brush.
Yeah.
And you can appreciate that because they're not, some of them do have a great deal of integrity and have public spirit. You know, why didn't they speak up when the ethics bill came out, when the resolution came out?
That's exactly the situation. This is, as Fred says, a closed-off institution. They do circle the wagons. I mean, this is a $150 million operation, but try to get the details of how this money is frequently spent. You cannot get it. They exempt themselves from certain aspects of the Freedom of Information Act. They have a lump sum budget in both houses in which they have big editorial staffs. They have darkroom facilities. They have television studios to produce newsletters, to produce electronic newsletters, half of which is, you can argue, is it political or is it public service that we're doing. But they have, just on the, all right, let's take, for instance, in the budget that was passed last week here, $41 billion budget, there was alleged $80 million in pork in there. Try to find out, try to get the information from these guys on where all this money is going. It's very undetailed.
Why do they hire attorneys?
You can't get it.
Why do they hire attorneys to protect them from investigators? Why do they seek to stop this Califano commission? Why aren't they instead saying the doors are open? Come on in, fellas. See what we have here. We have nothing to hide.
I think the attitude was betrayed in Fred Orenstein's reaction to your story. When our mouths dropped open, when he said, everybody does it, nothing's wrong. And I think that attitude, if you're here as long as Fred Orenstein has been, you think of yourself as apart from the people that you represent, and you become part of a certain atmosphere, and you accept it. And for a long time, I think, although we tried to get into it and knock on the walls, it's very hard, as Jeff says, to get to that information.
It's virtually impossible. They are not forthcoming with it, and and they will reject all requests for it.
What about the governor now? What do you think is going to happen? He's vetoed the bill. There's some doubt whether, will there be an override attempt? Fred, you wrote the other day, I noticed that you thought that maybe there wouldn't be an override attempt.
No, I don't think they're going to risk it, David. I think these members, legislators, are very uptight now over the negative press they're getting. If they're put in a position of voting for a bill that virtually everyone, including Rudolph Giuliani, says is a sham, and Robert Morgenthau says is a sham, I think it'll just add to their embarrassment. I think what the governor will seek to do is meet privately with the legislative leaders, get them to make a few more concessions to strengthen this bill. For instance, put criminal penalties back in. Why should a lawmaker who intentionally lies about his or her net worth not suffer some criminal penalties? I think they'll try to strengthen the law. I think the governor wants to work with these leaders. I don't think he wants total declaration of war. And I think the leaders, when they hear how upset their members are over the negative publicity they're being subjected to, will try to reach a compromise with them there.
I'm not as certain. I think that I could go out as a senator and say, we passed ethics legislation and the governor vetoed it. And how many people are going to know that it's got loopholes in it a mile wide? Or if I'm an assemblyman, if I'm a Democratic assemblyman, say, we wanted tougher ethics legislation, but we couldn't get the Senate Republicans to go along with it. And then the governor vetoed what we did have. So we tried very hard, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer out there.
Then the governor stays on the white horse that he's been able to stay on so far, and they keep circling their wagons.
The governor has never looked better. I mean, the legislature is so badly damaged, probably not this badly damaged ever in recent New York political history.
Okay, I think that we're going to have to wrap it up at that point. We thank you very much, and we'll check in with you as this story develops and as the whatever happens on the override when we come back next week. Lisa and I hope you join us.
How far does the witch hunt go before the press forgets about journalism 101 and thinks about sensationalism 202? I must tell you that the three individuals that we talked to as potential candidates mentioned two things. They couldn't afford to come to Albany, the salary is too low, and what they read in the newspaper most recently, the scandalous part of it, they know is identified to one or two individuals. It's only that the paintbrush has gone across the whole institution.
Inside Albany is made possible by the public television stations of New York and the New York Network. Additional support provided by the Energy Association of New York State, made up of New York State's 7 investor-owned electric companies, providing energy and jobs for a growing New York.
Here's your opportunity to phone Governor Mario Cuomo, our guest on a special live broadcast this Wednesday at 10 p.m. Beginning at 8 o'clock, there will be announcements on this station for the toll-free number for requests to question Governor Cuomo. During the telecast, we'll be calling back as many state residents as possible to have them present their questions to the governor live. Remember, 10 p.m. Wednesday, State Line. Call Governor Cuomo.